They called it paradise. But for the women trapped inside the Sultan's palace, it was a golden prison. Behind those jeweled doors, screams were silenced, names were erased, and beauty became a death sentence. This isn't a fairy tale about silk and luxury. This is the brutal reality of the Ottoman harem, where even the most beautiful slave knew one truth. The closer you got to the Sultan, the closer you were to danger. Stay till the end, because the truth about what these women endured will change how you see history forever. The beautiful prison begins. In the heart of Istanbul, where the call to prayer echoed through marble streets, another sound filled the air, the silent fear of women who would never be free again. The Ottoman slave markets were among the largest in the world. But this wasn't just chains and whips. It was luxury slavery. The empire wanted beauty, obedience, and silence. From the snowy mountains of the Caucasus to the villages of the Balkans, slave traders searched for young women, pale-skinned, light-eyed, and graceful. Circassian, Georgian, Ukrainian, they were seen as perfect stock. Families were deceived. Daughters promised to royal service, but once taken, they disappeared into the empire's shadows. To the men who sold them, they weren't humans, they were investments. At the slave markets of Istanbul, women stood in silence while buyers inspected their faces, teeth and bodies, like jewelry being examined before purchase. Some fainted from heat and fear, others tried to smile, because a smile could mean a lighter hand from the guards. But the cruel irony? If you were too beautiful, you were sent straight to the Topkapi palace, the Sultan's harem, a world wrapped in gold, guarded by silence. They called it the House of Felicity. But to the women who entered, it was a cage of velvet. Inside, names were taken away. You were given a new name: Turkish, Islamic, royal. Your past? Erased. Your family? Gone. Your body? No longer yours. Many of these girls were only 12, 13, 14 years old. They were trained to walk, dance, sing, and obey, not for freedom, but for survival. Every gesture was studied, every mistake punished, every smile could save your life, or end it. And while the world saw beauty, the silks, the jewels, the gold, the truth was that behind every shining chandelier hung the broken soul of a slave. This was how the beautiful prison began. And for those trapped inside, escape was not just impossible. It was unthinkable. Inside the palace walls, the nightmare deepened. The harem wasn't a home. It was a hierarchy of power, fear, and secrets. Inside the harem, the myth and the prison. History tells us the harem was paradise: music, silk, jewels, and beautiful women waiting to be adored. But the truth, it was a gilded cage, and every breath inside it was controlled. When a slave woman entered the Sultan's harem, she stepped into a world built on illusion. From the outside, it shimmered. Marble floors, jeweled lamps, gardens filled with roses. But behind every curtain stood guards, and behind every smile hid fear. The women lived in complete isolation from the outside world. They could not walk freely. They could not see the city. Even sunlight was a privilege, granted only to those the palace favored. They called it the House of Felicity. But for the women inside, it was the House of Silence. At the top of the hierarchy was the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, the true power behind the throne. Below her were the Cadens, the Sultan's official consorts. Then came the Iqbals, favorites who might one day be chosen. And at the bottom, the odalisks, the new girls, the slaves who served others and prayed never to be noticed for the wrong reason. Every day was a test of survival. One wrong word, one misplaced glance, and a woman could be beaten exiled, or sold away. The harem wasn't a home. It was a battlefield. But the weapons were smiles, whispers, and secrets. Even the Sultan himself could be both a dream and a nightmare. If he desired you, your fate was sealed. Luxury for a moment, fear forever. Because once you entered his chambers, you either rose in power or vanished without a trace. And while the empire glorified the harem as a place of beauty and order, it was built on broken lives, women stripped of their names, their choices, and their voices. They were taught to be perfect, but perfection in this palace meant submission. As the palace musicians played and the golden lights flickered through the lattice windows, one truth echoed through every heart inside. To survive here, you had to become what they wanted, or die trying. Before they could serve the Sultan, they had to be trained, and the lessons were not of kindness, but of control. The training, turning women into property. Before they could be seen by the Sultan, they had to be remade, not as humans, but as perfect, obedient reflections of what the empire wanted. Inside the harem's inner chambers, new slaves began what was called training. But it wasn't training for freedom. It was training for control. Every movement, every gesture, every glance was rehearsed until perfection. They were taught how to walk slowly, gracefully, never too fast, because haste was considered disrespectful. They were taught how to smile softly, how to lower their eyes just enough to show humility, but not too much, or it would seem insincere. Even their laughter was controlled. It had to sound gentle, never too loud, never too human. They studied music, poetry, and the art of seduction. They learned languages, Turkish, Persian, Arabic, so they could flatter, entertain, and obey without question. And if they failed, punishment came swiftly. A dropped tray, a wrong word, a hint of rebellion. Each mistake was met with public humiliation. Sometimes a beating, sometimes starvation, sometimes exile to the lower servants' quarters. It wasn't just about obedience. It was about breaking their identity until the girl who entered was gone forever. The harem teachers, often older slaves who had survived years of submission, enforced the rules ruthlessly. They believed that survival came only through obedience, and they taught it with the cold precision of soldiers. Some girls adapted, some resisted, but resistance rarely lasted long. They learned quickly that in this palace, silence was safer than truth. For the few who excelled, who mastered the language of grace and submission, there was a reward, the chance to catch the Sultan's eye. But that was the cruelest illusion of all, because in the harem, being chosen wasn't a dream. It was the beginning of another kind of prison. And as night fell over the palace, hundreds of women whispered the same prayer, not to be seen. When the Sultan called your name, it meant everything, and it could cost you your soul. The Sultan's night. Chosen and forgotten. For most women in the harem, there was one moment that could change everything, or end everything. The Sultan's night. Every evening, the palace came alive with whispers. The eunuchs walked the halls carrying silk scarves, a signal that the Sultan was choosing. And for hundreds of women waiting in fear, that scarf meant one of two things: elevation or erasure. If your name was called, your life shifted instantly. Servants rushed to bathe you in rosewater. Your body was perfumed, your hair woven with gold threads. But beneath the surface, beauty, terror grew. Because no one refused the Sultan, and no one knew if they would see morning. The chosen woman would be led through the harem gates by black eunuchs, silent watchers sworn to loyalty. Every step echoed like a drumbeat of fate. Behind those massive golden doors, power and fear met face to face. Some women were adored for a night, then forgotten forever. Others became favorites, iqbals, living in luxury, but under constant threat of jealousy and betrayal. And, for a rare few who bore the Sultan a son, their chains became golden. They were elevated to mothers of princes. But even then, safety was an illusion. A single rumor, a rival's whisper, or a lost pregnancy could turn favor into exile. Or worse, in a palace of beauty, love was never real, only survival was. Every night, hundreds of women prayed not to be chosen, while others secretly longed for it, because attention was the only path to freedom. And yet, freedom never truly came. Even the favorites lived as prisoners behind silk walls, their lives decided by a man they could never truly know. The Sultan's touch could make you powerful, or make you disappear. When dawn came, the palace would return to silence. A servant would remove the silk scarf from the chosen woman's door, and if it wasn't replaced by another the next night, everyone knew she was gone. In the Ottoman harem, one secret could save your life: motherhood. But even that came with blood, betrayal and fear, pregnancy and power. A slave's only weapon. In the Ottoman harem, beauty could earn you a glance, but only one thing could save your life: bearing the Sultan's child. For most women, being chosen was a moment of fear, but for a few, it led to the only chance at true power: motherhood. If a concubine gave birth to a son, her status changed instantly. From a nameless slave, she became Has Odalak, a woman of rank, protected by the empire's most powerful force: bloodline. Because in the Ottoman world, the womb was a throne. But this newfound power was built on danger. Pregnancy inside the harem was like walking on a knife's edge. Other women, jealous, desperate, watched closely. Poisoning, whispered rumors, and secret rivalries became weapons. If your child was a boy, you were a target. If your child died, your protection vanished overnight. Even after giving birth, a mother lived under the shadow of the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's own mother, the ultimate power of the palace. She decided which child would rise and which would disappear. One order from her, and a newborn could vanish from history without a trace. In a world ruled by men, women learned to fight with silence, with cunning, and with survival. Some mothers turned to manipulation, forming secret alliances with eunuchs or guards. They traded secrets for safety, favors for protection. Others lived in constant terror, clutching their babies in candlelight, praying that tomorrow the Sultan would still remember their name. For a few, motherhood brought riches, silks, jewels, chambers of their own. But behind those luxuries the fear never ended. Because in the Ottoman court, sons meant succession, and every heir created another war. Not on the battlefield, but inside the harem walls. The harem wasn't just a prison anymore. It was a battlefield disguised in perfume. Every woman dreamed of giving birth to a prince, but few lived long enough to see him grow. Even those who survived motherhood faced another horror: the slow torture of isolation, silence, and psychological control. The psychological hell, living in the Sultan's shadow. For the women who survived the Sultan's bed, their bodies were free from chains, but their minds were not. After the night of selection and the fleeting taste of royal favor came the real punishment: isolation. Those who had once danced and laughed in crowded halls were now kept in separate quarters, locked behind curtains of silk. They were forbidden from contact with the outside world. No family, no letters, no visitors. Only the whispers of other women, and the sound of their own thoughts echoing in the dark. In the harem, silence was more dangerous than screams. Because silence meant you had too much time to think. Each woman lived under constant watch. Eunuchs reported every movement. Spies within the harem, other concubines, listened for the smallest word that could be twisted into betrayal. Even a sigh could be turned into treason. Some women broke. They refused to eat. They whispered to the walls. They prayed to gods they weren't allowed to name. Others hardened, learned to hide emotion, to speak only when spoken to survive by becoming invisible. It wasn't the whip that broke them. It was the waiting, the endless waiting to be remembered or forgotten. Those who once felt the Sultan's gaze now lived in fear of it returning, because every visit could mean punishment, replacement, or exile. And for the ones never called again, time became a slow death. Their beauty faded, their youth lost, their existence erased. By middle age, many of these women were ghosts in silk, still inside the palace, but forgotten by history. Their only comfort came from watching new faces enter the same golden cage they could never escape. They weren't prisoners by force anymore. They were prisoners by fear, habit, and hopelessness. Even surrounded by jewels, power, and gold, their world was smaller than a cage bird's. But even in the darkest corners of the harem, rebellion was brewing. A silent war fought not with weapons, but with whispers. The silent rebellion, whispers in the shadows. They were taught to be silent. They were trained to obey. But silence has a limit. And inside the Sultan's golden prison, rebellion began to whisper. For generations, the harem ran on fear. But fear has a strange effect. It breeds cunning. It teaches you to fight differently. While soldiers waged wars outside, the real power struggles happened behind closed doors, between women who had nothing left to lose. Some learned to use knowledge as a weapon. They listened to every secret that passed through the palace walls, a careless word from a eunuch, a rumor from a servant, a whisper from an advisor, and traded those secrets like currency. Information became survival. In the harem, words could kill faster than poison. Others turned to manipulation. A soft smile here, a subtle gift there. An alliance formed quietly between rivals. Friendships were never real. Every kindness carried a cost. Every secret friendship could become a shield or a dagger. And then there were those who dared to escape. A few bribed guards with gold, jewels, or favors. Some disguised themselves as servants. Most were caught. Some vanished into the night. Their names erased, but their legend whispered in fear. Every rebellion was small, but every act of defiance left a crack in the empire's illusion of control. Even the Valide Sultan, the mother of the Sultan himself, knew how dangerous these women could be. They had no armies, no titles, no freedom, but they had something more dangerous: the ability to influence the Sultan's mind. A word in the right ear. A tear at the right time, and empires could shift. They were slaves in name, but queens in strategy. The rebellion was never loud. It was never public, but it was real. And it proved one thing, that even in a world built to silence them, these women never truly surrendered. The empire eventually fell, but the scars of its harem remained, shaping how women, power, and beauty would be seen for centuries to come. Legacy of the harem, scars that shaped history. The empire fell. The sultans died, but the ghosts of the harem never left. When the Ottoman Empire finally began to crumble in the 19th century, the harems that once defined its power slowly faded into silence. The marble corridors where women whispered and plotted were abandoned. The gilded doors sealed shut. But the legacy of what happened inside them, the control, the fear, the illusion of beauty, seeped into the culture like poison. You can close a palace, but you can't erase centuries of silence. The women of the harem had no monuments, no graves with names, no statues carved in their honor. Their stories were passed down as rumors, legends, and fantasies, distorted by time, turned into tales of seduction instead of survival. Europe romanticized them. Painters imagined the harem as a place of luxury, music, and pleasure. But the truth was darker. It wasn't a paradise. It was a factory, where innocence was reshaped into obedience and identity into silence. The harem didn't just imprison women. It redefined how power itself looked. Many of the empire's most powerful decisions began not in council rooms, but behind silk curtains, whispered in the dark by women who were never allowed to exist in history books. They shaped politics through fear and intelligence, influencing wars, treaties, and successions, all from within their golden cage. And yet, when history was written, their names were erased. Only the Sultan's name remained. Today, the word harem still carries a twisted beauty, exotic, mysterious, alluring. But behind that word are centuries of women who paid the price for that illusion. They were mothers of emperors and slaves of the same throne. The harem is gone, but its shadow lives on. In the stories we tell about beauty, power, and submission. It's a reminder that even in the most magnificent empires, the brightest gold often hides the darkest suffering. Their world was built to silence them, but their silence still speaks. If this story moved you, remember, history isn't just about kings and empires. It's about the forgotten voices that refuse to stay silent. Subscribe for more untold truths from the dark side of history.